Hello and welcome to the session on avoiding wasted time and effort with SalesPad. My name is Matt Greyerbiehl, Technical Sales Manager here at SalesPad. And in this session, we're going to explore how you can leverage SalesPad to eliminate a lot of the non-value-added waste you might be experiencing now in your order-to-cash cycle. And so we're going to be talking about not only SalesPad, but also how that overlays on top of a Six Sigma methodology, which is a linear process improvement methodology that aims at streamlining and achieving maximum efficiency within your order-to-cash process. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. So what I want to do is first start off with this quote from Jeffrey Liker. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Jeffrey Liker is the author of The Toyota Way, which is really a widely studied field guide on deploying lean principles in your organization. And in The Toyota Way, Liker provides us with a fantastic definition of waste. And so I'm just going to read through this briefly. In The Toyota Way, Liker says, the only thing that adds value in any type of process, be it manufacturing, marketing, or a development process, is the physical or informational transformation of that product, service, or activity into something the customer wants. So I want to pause there and think about that statement and try to reconcile that with your current processes. Is there a moment in your order to cash cycle from the time you receive an order to the time you collect the cash where information, a sales document, items, inventory fail to actively be transformed into something of value for the customer? That's what we want to address with SalesPad. So with that definition in mind, we're going to go in and explore three different use cases that are common amongst the customers and prospects that we talk to on a daily basis. And if any of these use cases sound familiar to you, I would encourage you that you reach out to your sales rep so we can further that conversation. So before we jump into these use cases, let's explore a little bit further the different types of waste that we encounter quite often in the order-to-cash process. And so Six Sigma identifies several different types of waste, several different types of process waste. We're going to focus on these six for today. These are probably the most common types that we encounter as we talk to prospects and clients about their order-to-cash process. And so the first one we're going to talk about is defect waste. It's very common to think of defect waste as a product defect. You know, a machining spec that says this diameter needs to be plus or minus 3/1000ths of an inch, or 1 inch plus or minus 3/1000ths of an inch. But defects can also mean errors. And so when we're thinking about an administrative process or order entry process, we can think of a defect as an error that's introduced to the system. And so errors often come up when you have a manual entry process. So if your outside sales reps are recording orders manually on a sheet of paper and then phoning those in to someone in the main office to record those in your ERP system, that's an opportunity to have an error introduced to the system because you're manually entering things, you're manually handwriting things. And so defect is not just a product defect, but also an error that could be introduced into your system. Next type of waste is waiting waste. So this is your work in process. So this is anytime you have a document or information that's waiting for someone else to take action to transform that into something of value for the customer. So think of, sales documents sitting in someone's inbox waiting to be processed. Maybe that same sales document is a dropship order and needs to go to your purchasing staff to actually create a PO. That time when that order is waiting for someone to take action on it, that's waiting waste. And so that's the second type of waste. The third type of waste is not utilizing. And this is one that's near and dear to us at SalesPad, as one of our core values at SalesPad is people first. And so the idea of not utilizing waste is that you have a process that's built around a manual redundant process that someone needs to execute on. And so if you have a process built that requires someone to manually click a button 500 times a day, that fails to utilize your staff, your most precious resource, to their fullest capabilities. And so not utilizing is something that we always want to think about when we're building out an efficient process. Next one is motion waste. So this is excessive movement without creating value for the customer. And so when we're thinking about motion waste, we could think about the physical movement of goods. So maybe you're transporting goods to 2 different distribution centers before they're actually shipped off to the customer. But motion waste could also mean things like excessive clicking, excessive movement throughout the application to get to the information you need. So, that's something that we address with SalesPad, which we'll see, where we have a very purpose-built user interface that makes it one-click access to get to the data you need. Last thing is excessive processing waste. And this could also be, duplicate entry, triplicate entry. So going back to that scenario with the outside sales rep that's taking the order in the field and then relaying that to someone to then enter again. When you think about that, you're actually entering that order twice. And that's an example of an excessive processing waste that we would encounter often in an order to cash process. So with that definition from Leiker, any time in a process when information activities fail to transform into something of value for the customer, as well as these specific waste types, we're gonna jump in now to the use cases. And so with the use cases, each one of these use cases falls within our order to cash field of play. And so when we're thinking about order to cash, this is really where SalesPad provides value to our customers and our prospects. So all we're really concerned about at SalesPad is the time you receive the order to the time you collect the cash, and we're looking to reduce that timeline by helping you to eliminate any kind of redundancy, excessive processing waste, motion waste, and we do that with our very purpose-built user interface as well as powerful workflows that help you to route orders through that process in the most efficient way possible. I wanted to start here before we get into the use cases just to acknowledge the fact that all of these use cases are really centered within this order to cash field of play. So sell and order, warehouse and fulfill, replenish, ship and deliver, invoice and collect. We're looking at the time you receive an order to the time you collect the cash. That's where we're focused on. And so let's go into the first use case. And I'm calling this the Dropship Organization. So just briefly stating what a Dropship Organization does. They're receiving an order from the customer, and then instead of fulfilling it from goods that they're inventorying, warehousing, they're just cutting a PO to the vendor, and the vendor's then drop shipping on their behalf directly to the customer. And so without a good process to manage that can lead to a lot of process waste that can really slow down that order to cash cycle. And so let's first jump into this process flow diagram here. And this, of course, is a little bit of an oversimplification, but it gets the main points across, the main requirements in that flow from start to finish. And so in a dropship organization, the first thing you have to do is enter the sales order. So you're getting that sales order from your customer. Next thing you have to do is enter a matching dropship purchase order so that you can communicate those requirements to your vendor to ship on your behalf. And this is where we have our first opportunity for some non-value added waste to occur. So that transition from entering the sales order to entering the dropship PO, that could lead to waiting waste. So that time where we're waiting for that sales order to be handed over to the purchasing staff to cut the PO, there's that first opportunity for waste. The second opportunity is the redundant activity of having to actually enter that PO. If we largely understand what's required to be on that PO from the sales document, we should be able to automate that and not have to manually do that. The next opportunity for waste is actually getting that purchase order to your vendor. And so whether that's via email or whatever means you're communicating that to the vendor, if you're manually doing that, that's something that can also be automated and cleaned up, and so we can eliminate that redundancy. Once the dropship PO has been shipped and the vendor has acknowledged that, now we need to recognize that and take our order and flip that to an invoice so that we can then bill the customer. So if we're waiting and we don't have some kind of automation to recognize that and flip that to an invoice for us, we have that waiting waste as well as that excessive processing waste that's extending this lead time for this process to occur. And so let's jump into a few screenshots in SalesPad, and we'll actually do a little bit of a live demonstration with the last 5 minutes of this session to walk through two of these scenarios so that you can kind of see this live. But let's just talk about a couple screenshots. And so this is the order entry interface inside of SalesPad Desktop. And what this is showing you is an order that has been released to our workflow. And our workflow allows you to define the different process steps that are in your order to cash fulfillment cycle. And so when you release that, you can trigger automated notifications, you can trigger plugins to perform some business function in the back end, you can trigger a print job, some email to occur. So all of that can be automated and built in with business logic to your order to cash workflow. And so what you're seeing here is a sales order that was created for a dropship item. We've released it to workflow. It recognized that it had a dropship line item. It routed it to create the PO. It automatically created the PO. It automatically emailed that PO to the vendor. And now it's going to move it to a dropship queue. And you can see those details on the action prompt there. And you can see the PO that was actually created when we released that document. And so all of those manual steps that are in that process typically are just absorbed and become a byproduct of workflow. It's just automated through that process. And so kind of looking under the hood, if you will, this is a view of the back-end workflow. And so this is where we define the different stages in the order-to-cash cycle. And you can see there's a rule there. That's my dropship routing rule. It's looking to detect a dropship line item. If that's true, then it's going to route it to my purchase order generation workflow queue, which then moves that onto the dropship queue once the purchase order is generated. And so with little to no developer background, really no developer background, you can build these workflows out, select the conditions and actions you want, and start recognizing this value almost immediately with SalesPad. You can actually take this a step further too. So this is automation, our automation tool. And this is a job that I have set up to look at my queue where the order's waiting on the dropship confirmation. When that allocation is recognized, it flips it to the next queue, and we can actually then transfer orders to invoices as well, automatically through our automation tool. So automations can move a document based on a condition change. We can transfer a document from order to invoice, for example. And so these jobs can be looking at your workflow to actively move them through the order to cash cycle without having to click a button, essentially. And so when we look back at the process flow for the dropship organization, that waiting waste from order entry to creating the PO is eliminated because we're automatically generating the PO when you release that order. We're also emailing that to the vendor, and then when we recognize the allocation or fulfillment of that dropship from the vendor, we're automatically flipping that to an invoice and then automatically moving that into our final queue to post. And so all of those different areas and opportunities for waste in the dropship organization are cleaned up with SalesPad. The next use case we're going to talk about is the mobile sales organization. And so this is any organization out there that sells from inventory from a truck, maybe just outside sales reps, not necessarily transferring the goods, from a truck, but maybe it's just an outside sales team that's taking orders in the field. Any company engaged in that type of activity is well suited to have a mobile tool to collect that data. Otherwise, you're using triplicate copies or you're phoning an order into the headquarters and essentially capturing that order twice. We don't want to do that. And so let's talk through the mobile sales organization. In the absence of a mobile tool to capture the sales, your process flow might look similar to this, where we start off with a sales rep in the field that's armed with triplicate copies, maybe a price guide. And the first step is to collect the required items from the customer that they're looking to purchase and price them out from your physical price sheets and record those onto a triplicate copy. There's our first opportunity for waste. And in this case, it's the defect waste. So remember, defect isn't necessarily a product defect. It's also an opportunity to introduce an error to the system. And if you are looking at a price guide for your items, what happens if you accidentally look at the price below the item you're looking to sell? And what if that price is lower than what you should have charged? You're going to lose out on your profitability. What if you transpose an item number when you're recording it onto that triplicate copy and you physically transfer the correct item to the customer from your truck? But when that triplicate copy gets reconciled with your inventory system, you're relieving the wrong item. Now your inventory's off. What happens if you're dealing with perishable goods in that scenario where you don't discover that discrepancy until the product's spoiled? This can be a very costly error. And so that transposing and manual recording of the order and the items and the price is our first opportunity for waste in that mobile sales scenario. Once the items are identified, the prices are identified, you go through the process of taking that payment, transferring those goods to the customer, and then making your way at some point back to the headquarters in many cases to hand off those triplicate copies to be reconciled with your system of record. There's our next opportunity for waste. So I can't tell you how often we hear this from customers when we're talking about mobile sales organizations where they've acknowledged that they've left a triplicate copy on site with a customer, gone all the way back to the headquarters only to find out that copy is still with the customer. And now they've got that trip back to the customer to pick up that copy so they can reconcile that invoice. So you're essentially driving back and forth to the customer twice. Also a little embarrassing to have to go pick up this physical copy from the customer. And so I've identified that here as motion waste, so excessive movement, going back and forth to the customer to pick something up you've left, excessive movement without creating value for the customer. Once those triplicate copies are collected and handed off, those go through a reconciliation process where somebody's entering them into your system of record to relieve that inventory. And so there we have excessive processing waste because we're recording the sale twice. You've recorded it once in the field on the triplicate copy. Now you're entering it again into your system. So that's excessive processing waste. There's also another opportunity for more defect waste, because if you are reading the triplicate copy as the person reconciling those orders, and maybe a 7 looks like a 1. Now you've entered the wrong item number and the wrong items being relieved from inventory. So that's another opportunity for a defect to occur. And finally, doing your payment application. If you've actually collected funds in the field, how do you reconcile those? If you've got a stack of cash and checks that you've brought back, or maybe some card transactions that you've run in a separate terminal, now you've got to go through the painstaking process of applying those cash applications to the orders. And so if you have no mechanism to collect that digitally, you're doing that a second time. And so this can create an enormous redundancy, an enormous amount of extra time required to process mobile orders. So we want to clean that up. And so with SalesPad, we have a mobile application that overlays directly on top of Dynamics GP. And so the first thing that we're seeing here, this is our mobile application showing us our item list. And so again, trying to avoid the defect waste at the very start of this process, rather than looking at a price sheet, an item guide, we're going to select items through this application to make sure that we're picking the right item number and adding it to the document. The image-based lookup and selection that you see here is probably one of a half a dozen different options you have for adding line items to the document. You could also scan, you could do a traditional lookup. The point is you have a way to enforce that the correct item is added to the sales document, that the correct price is added to the sales document. Next thing we're going to look at is, because this is all captured digitally, we can also do signature capture, we can also collect payments. All of this is captured digitally. We can then email a copy to the customer right there from our mobile device. So we're getting rid of those triplicate copies. We're getting rid of the opportunity to leave a copy on site with the customer and have to go back and engage in all that motion waste to go pick up the copy just to bring it back and reconcile it. Final slide here. You can see that the order is immediately recognized in your inventory system of record, in your ERP system. So this is showing SalesPad order entry, and then what that order looks like in GP. It's immediately recognized. So there's no secondary reconciliation of those orders back into GP, let alone the payment application on top of that. It's all immediately synced with Dynamics GP. And so, again, looking at our process flow here, we're eliminating that initial defect waste where we can potentially add the wrong price, add the wrong item. We're getting rid of the triplicate copies so you don't have this paper-based system where you can lose a copy. We're eliminating the redundancy required to re-enter those orders into GP so that you're relieving your inventory properly. And we're doing that all with the cash applied to the sales transaction so that you're really eliminating every bit of redundancy in that process. Final scenario we're going to talk about is customer service. And so customers are your lifeblood. You want to make sure their experience is positive with your organization. And so we want to look at customer service and how we can facilitate this. And often this requires accessibility to data. Whether you're receiving an inbound call from a customer or you're calling out to a customer, it's not always as simple as just entering an order. Oftentimes you have orders that are in process. Maybe the customer wants to know the status of that. Maybe they want to know what the last order they placed contained. Maybe they want to know what their outstanding balance is so that they can cut a check to you. All of these things are likely to come up in that customer service scenario, and they all require easy access to data to be able to process those requests efficiently. And so let's take a look at the customer card within SalesPad and kind of pull up some of those easy data access points here. So this first view, this is the customer card inside of SalesPad, and the arrow there is pointing to the sales order history. And so just by hovering the mouse over your customer number, you can see the last 4 years of revenue, freight revenue, cost, everything associated to that customer. And so this might be valuable if they're hitting you up for a discount. Maybe you want to know how active they've been. Are they increasing or decreasing in sales? Should they actually get this discount? Without even clicking, I can just hover my mouse and get that information. The second thing we see here highlighted on the bottom of the customer card, and really the customer card is broken into 3 sections. You've got the property information in the upper left, You got an open sales document view in the right, and then you've got this row of tabs. That tab that we have highlighted there, this is your item sales tab. And so if the customer wants to know, hey, how many of this particular item have I purchased in the last 6 months, 12 months, 24 months? I can quickly open this tab up, filter my list down by a particular item number, and you can see that sum box on the bottom of that grid that's telling me exactly the quantity they purchased over that specified period of time. So with 1, maybe 2 clicks, I've got that data, and I haven't left this screen. I'm still in the customer card screen. Continuing on the customer card, this section that I have highlighted here is the interactions tab. And so this is our built-in CRM capability. So if you need to recall a previous conversation, a previous email thread, instead of having to go out to some separate third-party system to look at that, you can reference that all within this single screen. So again, I haven't jumped off the customer card. I'm just toggling to a different tab all within that same screen, and I can see every conversation I've had with that customer. And this will actually sync with Microsoft Outlook. And so if your preference is to email back and forth with Microsoft Outlook, you can continue to do that, and we will sync those emails up. So you have a true single source of truth with easy access within the customer card. Final thing that we'll look at here on the customer card is the open sales document view. So as I mentioned, customer calls in, you reach out to a customer. They may want to know the status of a pending order. I can go to my open sales document view all on the customer card again and filter down to what stage it's in, a date they placed it on, and I can pop into that order very easily and communicate that to the customer. Down below, I also have a sales graph highlighted. So if you want to see trends, analyze where they're going, you can pop that open and see exactly what that customer's been doing over the last X amount of days, and use that for any kind of decision making or strategizing that may need to occur with that customer. And that wraps our last use case. So just to kind of recap a little bit, we first looked at the Dropship Organization, and we identified the different areas of waste there and how we can automate that process. We also looked at the mobile organization and how collecting those orders digitally will eliminate a lot of redundancy, a lot of opportunities for leaving physical copies on site with the customer. The last thing we looked at was customer service, and the fact that in order to provide world-class customer service, you really need data at your fingertips, and just how we provide that with SalesPad and that customer card concept. So SalesPad can really be leveraged, as you've seen, to eliminate specific types of waste, and through that, we're reducing that timeline from order to cash and creating greater profitability for you. And so let's look at some of the specific results that we've been able to achieve over the years for customers. So for example, 200% increase in order throughput. So that means you're able to scale the business without having to necessarily add headcount. Greater profitability. 85% reduction in time to quote, so that reduction in time. And then 100% pick accuracy. So through some of our data collection tools in the warehouse management space, we've been able to achieve 100% pick accuracy for over a year for some of our clients. So what that translates to is the elimination of costly return scenarios because of a mispick. And so these are all the outcomes that we're driving towards through leveraging SalesPad and eliminating some of these key types of waste in your order to cash process. So now that we've talked through the idea of waste, looked at use cases, talked about some of the outcomes, let's do a brief demo so you can kind of see this in action. Okay, so the first use case we're going to look at here live is that dropship use case we talked about. And so here I am in SalesPad, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new order, and I'm going to add a line item that I have set to default as a dropship line item. And so here we've got my new order started. I'm going to type in my item number since I know it, and we'll go ahead and pop that in, and you can see there's my HG20. It came in defaulted as a dropship item because I have set it up that way on the item record. And so now I'm going to simply define the vendor that I want to buy this from. And so I'm going to pop into my vendor field on the sales line, and I'll add the vendor I'm going to buy that from, save this, or dropship it from, I should say. And now that I've saved this, I'm going to just release this to my workflow. That's all I'm going to do. So order 11463, I'm going to release this into the workflow. And once I do that, we'll get an action prompt that will detail all of the successful actions that were taken when that order was released. And so we'll see this pop up in just a moment. And so what happened was the order 11463 routed to my Print Plus queue, which that triggered a notification to the customer. Once that went through the Print Plus queue, it evaluated that the dropship routing rule was true and that it should be sent to my purchase order generation queue. And then once the purchase order was generated, it landed in my dropship queue. And so this is order 11463. So now if we go into Sales Monitor, and Sales Monitor is really where you're going to monitor those documents as they progress through that order to cash process. If I were to go into my dropship queue, we can see here's order 11463 routed into my dropship queue. And if I open that up, we'll see on the Purchases tab of that sales document the purchase order that was generated. So PO number 3356 was automatically created for that order. And you can see here it contains the HD20 for the vendor that I specified on the sales line. And you can't see it, but in the background there was an email that was automatically generated and sent to the vendor with this purchase order on it. And so just to kind of recap, all I did was go to my customer, enter the order, specify the vendor that I want to drop ship that item to the customer on my behalf, and hit release. I didn't manually create the PO. I didn't send it to the vendor. I didn't do anything after that. I just entered the order and simply hit release. And so you can see several of those process steps were kind of absorbed through workflow and through the rules and conditions that I have on the back end managing my sales orders. Okay, now the second use case we'll show live is that mobile sales scenario. So the mobile sales organization. And so what you see on the screen here, this is the SalesPad mobile application that you saw kind of in the presentation. And I'm actually reflecting this from a live device that I'm using here. And so you can see this is my home screen. And if I want to drill into my customers, I can go ahead and do that. I can key in a specific customer, look them up, and I can go to the customer card and then place an order from that customer card. And so if I scroll down, you can see I can create an invoice, I can create an order, I can create a quote. I'm going to go ahead and create an order, and now I'm presented with a document ID that I can select and then go ahead and create that order. So I'll go ahead and save that, and now this is a live document, order number 11464, and if I want to add line items, I can go ahead and do that. I'm going to go into Quick Pick, which was that visual item lookup that I showed in the presentation, and here you can see after picking the category hardware, I'm now looking at my hardware options. So I can go ahead and select the quantity, select the item, go ahead and add that to the sales document, scroll down, and there you can see 4 of the P19-1008 fastener have been added to that order. I'll go ahead and save that, and once you save the order, you can take additional actions like collect a payment or capture a signature. And so if I go into my menu as an example, I can scroll down to my actions and take any additional steps that I may need to take with the customer. For example, signing the document. And once you have sign document selected, that will turn that signature capture or your mobile device into a signature capture pad that you can go ahead and capture that signature. But just to show you how integrated this is in real time, I have GP open in the background. And if you recall, the order number was 11464. So if I go into my sales transaction entry, I'm going to select order, and I'm going to look up that particular document ID that I created. And we should be able to see that order in GP automatically. And so if I scroll back to the last transaction, there's order number 11464 for the P19-1008 quantity 4. And so we'll do a little bit of side-by-side here. There you can see immediately recognized in that back-end GP environment. So really tight integration, immediately recognized once you've captured it in the SalesPad mobile application, and that's eliminating all of that redundancy. The defect waste that might occur by picking the wrong item or transposing it on a handwritten order copy, the reconciliation that occurs, that redundant effort to get those back into the system once they're collected in the field, once those orders are taken in the field. And so there you can see kind of live that order being created and immediately recognized in SalesPad. So as you see, SalesPad can be a very effective tool at eliminating a lot of these non-value added wastes that may occur within your order to cash process. We looked at that dropship mobile sales organization, and we looked at the customer service scenario. If any of those use cases sound familiar, as I mentioned, I would encourage you to reach out to your rep to learn more about SalesPad and how we can assist and drive greater profitability in your organization. And I'd also encourage you to think back to that statement that Jeffrey Liker makes in the Toyota Way. Think about your current processes. Are there any moments in your order to cash process where information activity inventory fails to actively transform into something of value for the customer. And if the answer to that is yes, then it's highly likely that you've got some process waste occurring that's limiting your ability to be profitable. So I'd encourage you, again, to reach out to your rep to learn more about how we can help you with that. My name is Matt Greyerbiehl, Technical Sales Manager here at SalesPad, and I thank you for tuning into this session.